from the CSC, they're going to start hiring. All you prison guards, go apply down at the port where mysteriously no drugs ever get intercepted. I'm just scratching my head. Anyway, 9:20. Let's switch gears now and head over to the KUAM News Zoom room, where we have the chief economist for the territory of Guam, Gary Hiles. Thanks for joining us, Gary. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Chris.
I'm in over my head with the economy. It's not one of my strong points, which is why I reached out to Nestor for some great questions. And I did send you those, so we'll just kind of run through these, and then if I have something, I have something. But we'll just start with what is the unemployment rate? Do you have that stat for us? And how current is it?
Yes, it's on our website. It dropped in the recent quarter to March. I believe it's about 16, a little bit of about 16%.
And obviously, maybe some context. How does that compare to the previous periods?
The previous period, the high was 19.4% in December, so it's dropped a little bit. And also during that time, that's from the household survey. We have a survey of employers, and in the latest 2 quarters, the employment numbers have increased somewhat, primarily in construction, but also some of the resumption with the reopening in services and hotels. And not only has the number of employees increased, but the number of hours worked have increased somewhat. So the first step when employers are getting busier is they'll increase the hours before they bring back people.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, Gary, because just anecdotally, I was talking with the manager at a restaurant, and we're hearing this a lot. I don't know if if this is a conversation that you've been privy to as well, but some of these businesses are out here saying that they can't get warm bodies to hire because everyone's on the PUA. So this restaurant manager I was talking to was telling me that she's like, yeah, we can't find anybody. So what ends up happening is the staff that we do have ends up racking up all this overtime because they don't have, they can't hire any, or people aren't applying for jobs. So all the unemployment's down. What kind of jobs were people getting?
The most is in construction, but also some hotel employment went up a little bit, and retail.
Nice. So those service kind of entry level type jobs,
and as well as construction.
Right.
One thing about the people on PUA that's mentioned a lot, but from 1/3 to 1/2 of the people on PUA actually are employed, but their hours have been cut. So the fact is that they're still retaining their relation to the employer, and as the employer needs additional work, they can just work more. But they're eligible for the PUA because their hours are so low. So I think the comment that employers can't hire workers, I think the environment is a little different. Certainly there's some truth to that. But there's also something called intensity of recruitment. In prior times, you might have had a line of people at your personnel office and a file of applications of people ready to go. But if you're having a difficult time recruiting people, running advertisements and job fairs is just like if your business is slow, you need to advertise and put it out there why the employee should look to you, because people may not know that's a job available.
Thanks for that reminder, Gary. That what did you say? 1/3 or 1/2 of the people on PUA are on it because their hours have been reduced.
That's right. Their hours are reduced and their pay is low enough to meet the income threshold to qualify.
Wow, that's interesting. What is the difference? Let's say for someone who lost their job and they haven't been able to go back, or it hasn't, so they're just fully on it. What is the comparison? Like, how much does someone on PUA for like a full year, the full PUA, how much do they make, and how does it compare to, let's say, some of these jobs that are available?
Well, right now the FUA payment is $345 a week plus 300 for the additional amount. So that would typically be above what a entry level or minimum wage worker would make, but not necessarily what someone else would. Uh, some people would make more than that.
Is that a rotary dial phone?
Yeah. Trying to read. I'm reading your questions.
Right. Okay. Good. Yeah. Okay. So now we're on the what's the latest of the federal minimum wage increases? We heard from President Biden he supports raising it to $15 an hour.
What I understand is that's not likely to go through Congress at this time.
Oh, you don't say.
It wouldn't surprise me that as the economy recovers in a year or two, that there's some compromise. And historically, over time, minimum wages have increased somewhat, but I would think it'd probably be at a much lower amount to get a compromise.
I saw a stat on the federal minimum wage increase. When was the last time it was increased?
It's been a couple of years, several years.
It's been several, right? I think 2013, I believe, was the stat I saw. So
we have a poster on my wall.
Right, yeah. Gary, so if we do, I mean, if obviously the read is that it's not going to be $15 an hour, but whatever it does jump to, will it result in the wage compression? I mean, because that's always the argument, right? Is, when they start getting paid more, then we got to pay everyone else more. And when that happens, if it does, how will Guam fare?
Well, Guam has, like the United States, gone through a number of minimum wage increases, and it hasn't seemed to affect the overall employment. But you're correct. There is some wage compression that people above the minimum wage, if they were like the supervisor, just a dollar above the minimum wage, and the minimum wage goes up, then they're not making more than the rank and file. So normally they would get somewhat of an adjustment, but not as much as the increase in the minimum wage. And as you go up the ranks, there would be some adjustment, but smaller as you go up. So we've been through those minimum wage increases before, and that's what happens. It overall results in a small percentage increase in the total labor costs, but not drastic.
Let me ask you about the local minimum.
Far lower than the percent in the minimum wage.
Ask about the local minimum wage, right? So the senators had a bill, delay it 6 months, governor signed it into law. Have businesses and, in your opinion, the economy, because it kind of seems like things are doing good, have they reached a point where they could afford to pay that minimum wage increase, or was it the right call at the time?
That's a compromise. Some businesses could, and some businesses would have a difficult time. The difficulty with most businesses is not the hourly wage they have to pay, but the lack of customers, especially in the tourism industry. So if they don't have any customers, then it doesn't really matter what the wage level is. They aren't able to afford any labor and don't need it. So that's really the biggest issue, to get the customers back, so that the wage is a smaller component of the whole issue. The primary issue is having the revenue going to the businesses. And that's another plug for the PUA, because all of the people that are receiving PUA are low enough income to have the income threshold, and so they go out and spend the money in the community to pay their rent, buy groceries, go to restaurants, pay their utility bills, and so on. So that creates jobs and employment for other people as well, not only the people that are receiving the PUA.
Can I ask, Gary, just from, as an economist perspective, we're lifting the moratorium on evictions fully on July 1st. In your opinion, has the economy rebounded enough to do that? And do you anticipate that there are still people out there who just quite simply can't make ends meet or pay the rent?
Uh, at this time, the anecdotal experience has been with the PUA for those that have lost their jobs that are low income. That's covered most of it, as well as the stimulus checks. So people have been able to catch up on their rent. I've talked to people in real estate. There's a few people that are behind, but not a very large percentage. However, I'm very concerned when the PUA program runs out that people that don't have a job and that used to have a job and uh, uh, are structured to have payments like rent and so on, that could be a very serious problem.
I would like very serious problem is almost an understatement, right?
I think so. Uh,
So Gary, the conversations we've been having here on the link with, I mean, Dave is one of them, with the senators, with some of the university, GCC people, is they're standing up these different training and work placement programs. My question is, in your opinion, do you think that we have enough time to stand these programs up and get people in and out of them before the pool runs out in September?
well, I think it's a great time. Always, it's good to do training, and it's some of them will because jobs in the tourism industry, I think, will start trickling back, but they won't be immediate. So a lot of people will still be out of work. So getting training at that time is great for employees. It's also and good for employers to help build up the skill levels. So when things do resume, you have a more trained workforce. And also, it takes advantage of the federal funds. So that's another way to absent unemployment for people who have some income support.
We had Dave Delasola on the other day, and he likened the ending of the PUA to driving off a cliff. So let me ask you, what's at the bottom of that cliff?
I think there's going to be a variety of responses. Uh, One of them is people will be forced to make difficult decisions, and some people may move in with relatives and maybe squeezing the house very tight. And other people, I've already heard anecdotally that several people have moved off island to find jobs in the States. So I think that's also a concern for me, for individuals that may be forced to move when they didn't really want to leave Guam and to seek employment elsewhere because they need a job to survive. But it's also, I think, going to create a very difficult situation for employers, because if employers are having a difficult time getting employees now, if after the PUA ends, if there's a significant outmigration, as there was after 9/11, then when the tourism rebounds and you all of a sudden need a lot of employees, they may not be there anymore. So I think the PUA program has been, as it was intended, along with the SBA loans to Payroll Protection Act to employers, is to kind of bridge the gap. So when the tourists do come back and the jobs come back, the labor force is there ready to go. If it's purged, then when the businesses are ready to reopen, that's going to be also a huge problem, especially some of the skilled workers that are able to relocate.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about that brain drain. Right. And so there are efforts, at least with the spending plan that the senators submitted to the governor. I think there might also be a bill from Senator Teitigui in the works, but a lot of these professional technical fields, right? The senators wanted to allocate, I think, over $10 million to various scholarship programs. Among them, the University of Guam, the ProTech Scholarship Program, which is supposed to assist, medical, technical, and professional students seeking education off island with tuition, offset their tuition costs. So, and in exchange for that, they end up coming back to Guam and working here and bringing all their knowledge and their expertise that they learned elsewhere back home, right? So when we talk about people who have had to leave and go to the States, and I mean skilled workers as well, How crucial do you think those programs are, and how crucial is it to kind of boost the funding support for them to kind of mitigate the brain drain that's happening right now and it is likely to happen in the very near future?
I think they'll be helpful and it'll play a niche role. It's not going to be the largest part of it. And the when the economies are changing, I think you're going to see a little bit of migration both ways. There's probably some people that are from Guam in the States that lost their job and they may do the thing that a lot of young people do is go back to live at mom and dad's house. And so you probably will have some people returning to Guam because they've lost their job in the States, but you'll probably also see, since the unemployment rate is much lower in the States, you're going to see a lot more migration from Guam to the U.S.
I want to talk about the spending, right? I mean, just in looking outside, and again, this is not even scientific in any way, shape, or form, but I think even Jason would agree. It kind of seems like people are spending money out here, and I mean, like spending money at shopping, and you look around, people are eating out. So I guess just knowing that, and you probably see it yourself too. What type of spending are we seeing in the economy, and what type of activity, and how helpful is it to kind of get us to where we need to go?
I kind of look at the economy as there's two components: the tourist economy, which is essentially shut down, and the rest of the economy. The rest of the economy is doing pretty well because of the combination of the PUA that's replacing individuals and lost wages, along with the stimulus checks. But that's going to be short-lived as those stimulus funds get spent. There's also some pent-up demand where people were stuck in their house for a couple of months and didn't spend any money, and so now they're eager and to go out and go to restaurants and travel and do some things. So we're seeing some of that as well. But a lot of businesses in Tumon Bay are almost exclusively catering to tourists, but there's a lot of restaurants and so on that have a mixed clientele. So they have their local clientele, but not their tourists. And there's still some hesitancy due to the public health emergency for some people to go out and eat at restaurants and things. And also a concern about the future. If there's uncertainty about PUA running out, people are not spending all of the money, which is it has a pro and a con. The con is that the economy is not getting stimulated as much as you would expect from that amount of money being circulated, and the government is not collecting as much tax revenues, businesses are not getting the revenues. But the upside is that people are saving, and then later on when they're have no income, they're still able to hold out and pay their bills for a while.
Gary, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you had said that people were pent up demand. And this is anecdotal as well. God, we said anecdotal like 50 times in this interview. But we were working through the whole pandemic, and when we were here, we noticed that, and because we also did some stories on the backlog at the post office, that people were really buying a whole lot of stuff online, right? And just hearing from people who work at the post office, it's kind of tapered down, right? A lot of the online ordering. But you hear that argument that, we're just funneling all this money off island. Is that something as an economist that you agree with, or is it a minuscule impact?
Well, first of all, the online has grown, and I think the pandemic, the fact that people were forced to go online, myself, for example, things that I couldn't get here during the pandemic. Once you find a store in the States and then you get used to ordering online, that process, I think, is going to be a permanent continuation and increase. As a percent of the total business, I think it's still relatively small, and it varies by type of business. But the interesting thing to me that I found, I asked one company, a retail store, if they're losing customers due to online shopping, and they said the retail customers not so much because you want the convenience, but they're losing a lot of their wholesale business because a vendor that's going to, you know, uh, build, let's say, renovate 100 rooms, instead of buying it locally through the wholesaler, now with the internet and the online connections, it's they can figure out what they want and then order a large quantity directly. And so I think that's going to put a dent in the need for the intermediary of the wholesale in some cases.
In your opinion, as an economist, are we doing the things that we need to do to get the economy back up and running? Is there anything, when you look at the lay of the land, that you feel would be more helpful or is hurtful to accomplishing that goal?
Well, I think the absolute number one priority is uh, for the visitors is the public health situation. Number one, to get people vaccinated as much as possible, uh, and that allows the local economy to function better and residents to go out and spend, but also to have the systems in place so that tourists can feel comfortable. Part of that is having a high vaccination rate here, so the COVID situation is under control, but also to have the mechanism to allow tourists to come if they've been vaccinated, and some testing and quarantine protocol. So it's much easier that they don't have to quarantine on both sides. So with international tourism, it's harder because like in Hawaii, all they have to do is have the quarantine for Hawaii for people to come from the United States, have that. But we have to have it on both sides. The quarantine and admission issues on Guam, as well as the return, so that people can return to their home country without quarantine. So it's a bigger challenge, but with the improvement in vaccinations, I saw something in the news that gave me probably the biggest news. Two things since I did my economic outlook. One is that with the vaccine that we didn't know in January is that if people have the vaccine, they're not likely to transmit the virus. So that was a major breakthrough on the information. The second thing, the great news I heard this week, is that South Korea is doing a massive vaccination, and they expect to have their population like 70% vaccinated by September, 70 or 80. So that South Korea has been our largest tourist market. That's very encouraging. And we don't even need to have 100% vaccinated, because those that are vaccinated could travel to Guam. Right. So I'm very encouraged that that might pick up pretty significantly and pretty soon.
We've kind of been held hostage by what we've been able to do with, not just with the vaccination, but with reopening the island, right? So what we're having happen now is people who are vaccinated are leaving, taking these trips, going to the States, whatnot. In your opinion, was there anything we could have done different to kind of maybe accelerate travel plans into Guam, tourism, that kind of thing?
Well, Hawaii was a little bit ahead. They started opening their tourism with testing. Right. That's been determined not to be as effective as vaccination, but that might have been able to do a little bit to get a head start. But I think the vaccinations are the largest and most critical issue.
Right. Yeah. Okay, Jason Solis, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, Gary. It's always good to talk to you, as always. I just have one quick question, because I have the good fortune of doing the real estate segment on our program with Liz Duenas and Gina Campos from Remax Diamond Realty, and they have noted since the beginning of the pandemic how very generously the federal government lowered the interest rate to try and stimulate that sector of the market. With economic cycles being, what they are and everything, and with the cost of goods sold, we did a report on the price of gas has gone up slightly, and I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, it too plummeted. How dramatically do you foresee retail items or like service industries, with possibly increasing their prices, or like interest rates maybe going up as we begin to return to more and more of a normal way of life?
I think the short-term outlook is that interest rates are going to be held pretty steady for the short term. Uh, the spike in the gas prices, it was partly a resumption to prior prices, but it's gone up a little bit. Uh, there was a recent story a month or so ago that due to the new construction in the States that the lumber prices have gone up a lot, but just the following that is that the supply and demand situation has changed, so they're falling. I know we're trying to order some new, Jason, you should appreciate this, some new computers, and
Always.
the supply chain is that there's a shortage of chips, and some auto manufacturing in the United States has been shut down plants because they couldn't get the chips. So to the extent that there's supply chain disruptions due to the pandemic, and the also due to the United States trade and political issues with China, that's impacted some of the trade and supply chain. So there will be some supply chain shortages, and that will cause a spike in prices and some things, and some of those will be short-lived, like in the lumber that they spiked and then now they're going back down. I don't see a general increase in inflation. Inflation has been very low in the United States, and Guam follows that pattern of maybe a couple of percent a year for several years, and I expect that to continue along with low interest rates. I think the biggest challenge in real estate is right now there's a supply shortage, and with the low interest rates and expectations regarding the military buildup, there's more demand than there is supply. But I'm concerned that when the PUA money runs out, and if tourism doesn't recover fast enough, it's a race against one thing against another, that there could be a downward trend in part of the market where people have to bail out, and there's distressed sales and foreclosures and bankruptcies as there were after 9/11. So that possibility hasn't been ruled out yet.
And perhaps, Gary, could you speculate just for a real quick second on, because I like how you said before the fact that we were all staying home, we were forced to stay in, we probably weren't spending, probably being the operative word, maybe as much as we normally would because we weren't going out. What have you seen as far as like the last year and a half in human history about like wealth management, or people putting money away smartly, maybe putting it in some interest-bearing account, or maybe even investing, and how might that shape up in the next year or so?
I don't have exact numbers, but in talking to some people in the banking industry, that the savings deposits have gone up considerably.
Oh, good.
And the trend in the credit card balances has gone down. So people are paying off their credit cards and saving more. So that's taking some of the fiscal stimulus out of the economy in the short term. So we're not recovering as fast as you might expect from the amount of money that's being pumped in. But it is providing some additional financial stability and security. So if people lose their job, they have some savings.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know, when the stimulus was announced, and then when the disbursements started coming out, there were obviously everybody was saying, take this money and let's put it back into the economy. Let's do what we have to. And there were maybe a scant few people. I know Dr. Tom Shea mentioned it, and your colleague Dave Della Sola were saying, ladies and gentlemen, you might also want to put it away, save some for a rainy day, have it as an emergency fund. It's great that we have this sudden infusion of cash so you can maybe cover bills and do like stuff and everything like that, but we don't know what's going to happen, from Tuesday to Wednesday. So if you can, try and stash some of it away.
Absolutely. Yeah. Having a cushion for business and individuals is great. It gives you a lot of security.
Yeah, certainly that was not the majority voice and everything, but good to see that some of our people are actually doing that.
So in the aggregate, that's what's happening.
Oh,
that
good.
There's more than
Right on, Gary. Anything in closing you want to add? I feel like we covered a lot of bases here.
Yeah, the U.S. Department of Labor just issued a new
Man,
comparing
dude,
Guam
that's actually why we brought you on.
And
Sorry.
then there's that thing.
to the U.S. Generally, Guam wages are in the latest year are 31% below the national average overall. But if you look at the history on Guam wages have been rising, but the gap seems to have remained. Part of that is due to the differences in occupations that we have on Guam. Partly due to demographics and the fact that we're a small economy, we don't have as many higher paying jobs in the healthcare industry. And we have more, due to our tourism industry, we have more jobs in the services sector. So part of that difference is due to the structure of the economy. But if you compare occupation to occupation, accountant to accountant, there's still a significant gap that the U.S. wages are higher. But for a lot of employers use this information to look at how their compensation compares to others in the industry. So we have on our website at bls.guam.gov information on the pay for various occupations, over 200 occupations, and not only the average pay and the median pay, half above and half below, but we have a wage distribution. So you can see the range of wages from the bottom 10% to the bottom quarter, the top 10%. So you can see if the people you're hiring are more skilled and more experienced than average, you can get an idea of what the upper range is that might be more appropriate, or if they're very entry level in that occupation in a small company, maybe on the lower range would be appropriate. So that we have hundreds of pages of wage information. And one issue too is we've broken out the wages, and we'll have that published on our website shortly. For the recent years is a breakout of the wage levels by occupation, by sector. So what the federal government is paying the private sector and the government of Guam. So that provides a lot of detail.
Yeah, Gary, I remember because the conversation kind of changed, and there are efforts, I think, with policy and maybe just generally speaking, to kind of close that wage gap, right? And that's all tied in with people relocating from here, because you get someone who does job X on Guam versus job X in the States, and the pay is just, there's no comparison. So is closing the wage gap relative to what you make over there and what you make here, is it a losing battle given some of the constraints that we have to deal with relative to like our political status, or what we can do here on island to pay people more?
To some extent, as the economy improves, the market should allow increases in wages. Hopefully, will reduce the gap somewhat. Also, it's an issue related to training, because if we train people in an occupation, spend a lot of money training people in an occupation where the wage levels are too low, then it becomes a revolving door. They go through the training and then they find a different job. Right. So the two need some coordination.
Jason, anything before we let him go?
No, that was fantastic. I've always appreciated like Gary's insight and the breadth of his knowledge and stuff. And Gary, you were referencing computers just a moment ago. I think it's absolutely poetically fitting that you've got that big printer behind you, because when I first met you 23 years ago, I was your account rep at Computerland selling you printer toner. So now you coming back and giving us your expertise on that.
Well, geez, the size of that printer, you must go through a lot of toner.
It's interesting. We like the high quality and high speed, but as more things go online and people download the reports, we're not printing as much.
Right, yeah. I love touching it, so.
But we've got big monitors, so.
All right. The better to see you with.
virtual.
Gary, thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Appreciate it. There you go, Gary Hiles, Chief Economist. Good stuff. Good talk.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because at
Yeah.
the beginning, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were talking about, who we could tap in the community, what experts and, what subject matter people knew the most about. And I remember Gary was one of the first people I said, because I was like, why don't we get, the opinions, of economists and, it was hard to get economists at the beginning because they were like, we can't really get a beat on this thing
Yeah,
yet.
yeah.
And then now we've had people like Gary, Dr. Roseanne Jones at UOG
Yep.
have come out there. There are studies being commissioned to try and really, document what has happened and now hopefully like forecast, what could be coming down the road. So
Yeah.
it's good stuff.
I mean, it's going to be, and we're talking about this with the economy now, but I mean, the same thing's going to be happening with like the public health response to COVID. I mean, as we wind down the vaccination effort and they're able to study it more, we're going to find out more about the vaccinations, right? So it's kind of like as we inch toward this, whatever the normalcy is going to be, we're able to kind of hindsight and figure things out.
You know, it's also weird how you say every once in a while, and you're like, on Guam, are we just too unnecessarily restrictive with the PPE and stuff like that? I mean, it's kept us in the position where we are, and I think that's great. It's also interesting to see, like, over the last year, if you look at the chronology of it, where our people were, literally lining up at 2 a.m. for a single box of food that opened at like 8. And yet you go like to CNBC or something like that, and you read like Amazon stock prices up like 400%.
Right, yeah.
And companies in the state, they're still, tech companies are launching every day. They're coming up with, new ideas. People are, and it's, it's interesting, like some of the dichotomies between, different communities and markets.
I feel like Guam was hit harder. I don't know because again, I didn't see what was happening in the States, but having gone out to these lines where people were just desperately waiting for food, the grab and go from GDOE, man, it was heartbreaking.
Well,
really
they've also said
heartbreaking.
that Guam's
And
system,
almost like a lot of people were just hopeless, you know what I mean? Looking in their eyes and seeing them because we didn't know. There was the part of you catch this virus, you could die, and then there was a part of like, I don't got a job, how do I feed my family? And they were both just kind of converging into this terrible.
They've also mentioned that
I hate looking back at it.
the pandemic overall kind of shone light on the fact that like a lot of areas of Guam is very, very brittle and can very easily become overwhelmed, like the hospital,
like tourism, for
like
example.
the fact that we've only got tourism.
Right, yeah, there you go. 9:57. Let's do Cover Me, which is brought to you by our friends at Burger King and Docomo Pacific. This is the link. Good morning.